Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and this is a Patreon voted on video. This is, more specifically, this is 10 underrated games, the top 10 underrated games. And to be very clear, this is obviously top 10 underrated games in my opinion, because the word underrated is a bizarre concept to begin with. Watch me spend like 4.5 minutes talking about it. I'll try to keep it to a minute. Underrated, is, or overrated for that matter, is the idea that we think something is rated above or below what it should be. It is inherently an arrogant term in terms of its pure usage of it, that's saying other people are wrong, I'm right. These games are not good. People think they're good, but I know better. Or these games are amazing. People think they're not good, but I know better. So to be very clear, I'm using it in the terminology of, in my opinion, this game is better than the general audience thinks it is, and the general ratings would imply. So, what does that mean for you? It means you can, I guess, go ahead and get these games if you're interested, especially if you find that your opinion does align with my own, and if not, if your opinion aligns more with Board Game Geek, which I am using as the reference point here, then you probably should not get these games, and this may or may not be just entertaining to watch, but don't use it for advice if you find that you align more with Board Game Geek than with myself. That said, very few, I think maybe 2 games on this list are actually quote-unquote poorly rated games. More often than not, these are games that my rating differs from the general rating by a decent enough chunk that I consider these games to be underrated. And these are going to be 12 games. I know I called it like top 10, but I'm including 2 more because of the fact that 2 games I don't have with me. So I can excuse throwing them in here, even though they're not really here. The first of those games is Terra Nova. Terra Nova rated a 6.4 on Board Game Geek, and for myself, I'd rank it an 8. Now, to be very clear, for the sake of simplicity for this, I'm converting my usual 5-point scale into a 10-point scale, just so we can more easily see the differences, but I'm still using a 5-point scale, meaning when I say it's an 8, I mean it's a 4 out of 5. But Terra Nova, which for me is an 8 out of 10, a 4 out of 5, compared to Board Game Geek's 6.4, that is a, what is that? That's a 1.6 jump. A 1.6 jump in rating in terms of where I think it is. Terra Nova is an amazing experience, one that I got rid of only because of the game Ragnaroks. Ragnaroks is a different game that Grey Fox Games brought out from the designer of Santorini. And Ragnaroks incorporates the same general mechanics and feeling of Terra Nova, but with variable player powers. Some of the differences as well, but even so, even now, I kind of half regret getting rid of Terra Nova because of how good it is, and also because I don't yet have Ragnaroks, which was a mistake on my part. Maybe I'll get it back, maybe not. I don't know. We'll figure that out another time. But Terra Nova is an excellent game, a pure tactical experience, abstract goodness to the max, trying to maximize your scoring as you try to navigate, push your pieces around the board in order to like move, build wall, trying to slowly lock off your opponents. It is brutal, it is cutthroat. It's basically the game I recommend if you've played Hey That's My Fish and you like Hey That's My Fish, but specifically if you like Hey That's My Fish as a head-to-head cutthroat 2-player experience, then I'd recommend going to Terra Nova for a more cutthroat, whatever 2-player experience. It does play with more than 2 players. I do not recommend it with more than 2. I recommend it as a 2-player, head-to-head, abstract, cut-off-the-territory experience. Next up on the list for the second one that I don't have is Guards of Atlantis. And you see I got rid of Guards of Atlantis because Guards of Atlantis 2 was coming. Same problem. I don't learn apparently. Guards of Atlantis 2 is not yet here and Guards of Atlantis is gone. So I'm kind of out a really, really good game. And Guards of Atlantis for me is a 9, a 4.5 out of 5. It's a 9 compared to its rating of a 7.3. That's a 1.7 point difference. Guards of Atlantis is amazing. This is a game that the new one, Guards of Atlantis 2, is more highly rated, but that's it's not out yet. It's primarily used by hardcore fans of the game who have been playing the game on TTS or are just excited and rated it without playing it, so I don't take into account that higher rating. Going by the regular Guards of Atlantis, I think it's a fantastic experience. It really tries to mimic the, what is it called again? Not the MMO. No, it's called something else. What's that genre where you have little MOBA, the MOBA genre, there we go. The Massive Online Battle Arena. The MOBA genre, games that in my collection that have that will be Skytier, will be Guards of Atlantis, and will be Rum and Bones. And all 3 of those I think are fantastic games. And while I did do a Play This Not That comparing Rum and Bones to Guards of Atlantis and ultimately picking Rum and Bones, the 2 were very close. Guards of Atlantis is an excellent experience, and I think 2 will only further improve upon that, streamlining some potential balance issues of the game, and generally giving you the same positives, but better, but more. It's a game I'm incredibly excited to receive back to. It's a game that I'm still surprised it's 7.3. I don't know, maybe it was the balance issues, maybe that's the issue with it. I don't know, I can't say for sure. My biggest pet peeves were slight balance issues, but not enough to bother me, and then the fact that it's a game that I only ever played at 4. Playing it at 2 doesn't feel, I'd rather play Rum and Bones as a 2-player experience, and that doesn't really work as well at odd player counts, and I rarely have 6 people that would want to sit down and play that. So it's a very specifically 4-player experience, which means it is competing with a lot of other very good, very specific 2-player experiences. But it's an excellent game, one I really recommend. That will be Guards of Atlantis. And from there, we go into games I actually have, which is helpful because I'm still not doing B-roll on the channel yet. Eventually, one day we'll get there. And the first up is Tribune. Now, this list in particular, the way I'm ranking the rest of these, those 2 I got out of the way, we're good to go. The rest of these games, the way I'm ordering them is by from the lowest to the highest gap. So in other words, this one has a gap of 0.8. It is a 7.2 on Board Game Geek. I give it a 4 to 5 or an 8, which means it's a 0.8 difference in the gap. That is the smallest gap we're going to have on these remaining 10 games. The largest gap is a 2.8 point gap in terms of how I rank it compared to the general audience. But starting with Tribune, Tribune is a worker placement game that I started by saying that overrated, underrated are arrogant terms, implying that my opinion means more. So excuse me for the rest of this video while I spend time being baffled why some of these games are not ranked more highly. I recognize and respect the fact that the general population, general opinion counts for a lot more and should count for a lot more than a single person's opinion, but dear Lord, Tribune is amazing. I don't know why this game is only rated a 7.2 on Board Game Geek. This is a fantastic game, one that got reprinted. I don't know anything about the reprint, so I would highly encourage you to check out this one, the original, if you're able to track down a copy. The expansion is completely unnecessary. I have the expansion, I should get rid of it. I never ever use the expansion. I use the 3 assassin cards, and that's all. I use 3 cards from the expansion, and nothing else do I touch, because the expansion really makes it more modular and more approachable for larger player counts, but I rarely play this with more than 4 anyway, and once I get to 5, there's a lot of games I play, and like I said already, I don't often have 6. So, useless expansion, don't track that down, you don't need it. I'm a completionist, and I'll get rid of my expansion. I should, probably. I don't know if I will, maybe I'm not. I don't know. Either way, Tribune is a worker placement experience where you place down your workers into various zones and then you fight over these various factions. You're trying to get control of various factions. You go for variable scoring objectives because you have variable scoring objectives in the game, different ways to approach the end game, different things you need to do. And so you're trying to be mindful of that while you get control of the factions. There's takeover bonuses each time you take control of a faction. Then there's additional bonuses for owning the faction every single round. Then you're trying to fight for the chariot auction where you can apparently lock in control of your factions. It is mean, it is brutal, it is cutthroat. It involves placing down your workers, trying to get to the right zone, right place. It involves bidding against other players, trying to read their minds. I know that you want this, but I want that. To me, it's worth 7. To you, it's worth 8. What is the right price point to bid for this set of cards? There's so much going on in this game. If you like worker placement, you have to try Tribune. You have to. Or you should ignore me and go by the general Board Game Geek rating, which gives it a 7.2, which is good, but not that great. It's okay. It's not a game that you necessarily need to pick up, but Tribune is fantastic. It's fantastic. That's all I'm saying. I'm saying it's fantastic. I'm moving on. Antike Duellum. Number 9 on the list, Antike Duellum, coming in at a 7.1 on Board Game Geek, an 8 on my scale. That's a 0.9 difference from the 0.8 we just covered. Antike Duellum is the 2-player version of Antike, and then Antike 2, I guess. We had Antike, then we had Antike 2. Antike Duellum is the 2-player version. This doesn't really have a fun box that I can show you over here. Nothing going on. It is from Max Gertz. If you're curious who that is, Mac Gertz? Mac Gertz, not Max. Mac Gertz, who is the designer of Concordia, ranked the 19th highest game on Board Game Geek, and well-deserved. That is not underrated. It's not overrated. That is beautifully well-rated. But Antike Duellum is a beautiful experience if you like area control for a 2-player head-to-head game. Now, I have Antike 2. The reason Antike 2 is not on this list is because A, Antike 2 is rated higher, and B, I prefer Antike Duellum. I think that prefer is a hard word, but I would say when I have more players in area control, I would rather play other area control games. When I have 2 players in area control, Antike Duellum is the best 2-player area control game I have in my collection. Area control specifically in the genre of dudes on a map. I'd have to compare other area control games to see if they match up. Area control and dudes on a map have a lot of overlap, but are not always the same. So Antike Duellum, fantastic experience, amazing dudes on a map little game for 2 players head-to-head as you work your way around rondels. If you know Matt Gertz, you know he likes rondels in a variety of his games, from Navigator to Imperial to whatever, and to Antike and Antike 2 and Antike Duellum and all of that stuff. I love this game. It is beautiful, it is elegant, it works well as a 2-player dudes on a map game, which is weird because that usually doesn't work that well in a genre. Usually that is very victim to one player escalating and getting too powerful in a way that the other player can't outpace them. But this is a game where you can dance, you can pivot, you can move around, and you can react to what your opponent's doing. You can build up your economy, you can react and start moving to a more of an aggressive stance. You can start going for the science to try to build up your edges there. This is a game where 2 decent players, I mean obviously a good player versus a bad player is a different story, but but two halfway decent players going head to head will be able to dance and maneuver around each other, reacting to what your opponent's doing as you vie for control, as you vie for those 9 victory points that you can get through a variety of different ways, including economic, including destruction, including warfare, including exploration, including a lot of things, and it plays in roughly 90 minutes to 2 hours. Really solid game. That is Antike Duellum. Which brings us to the smallest box in this list, and that's Tranquility. Tranquility, also the newest addition for me on this list. Tranquility is a fairly new discovery for me, ranked a 7.0 on BoardGameGeek, and I understand how this is ranked a 7.0. I do. I'm not going to say I don't. I completely get why this would be a 7.0 on BoardGameGeek. For me, it is an 8, which gives us to a straight 1 point difference. 1.0 going from 0.8, 0.9 to 1. This, though, is so good. It's so good. And I know these little quibbles of 0.8, 0.9, it may not seem like a lot, but it can matter a lot, especially at that scale. And Tranquility is so ridiculously delightful. I don't know I'm taking the box top off. I'm not going to play it or take the cards out. But this is a game that, to begin with, if you've ever played The Game, that's what it's called, The Game, and you liked The Game, you should you can keep the game, you should try Tranquility. It is a game worth trying. But where The Game is one that I would consider a 7, a solid 7, decent game, nothing to write home about, maybe even a 6.8, I don't know, whatever it is, I don't rate in 0.8s, but Tranquility is delightful. It is a teamwork-based game as you play your cards out to a map. This game, I mean, for context, the fact that I'm holding Kira right now means it will be going off to the side when I'm done this video, and I will be playing it tonight because I can't see a reason not to. This is so much fun. I love Tranquility. You're basically playing cards cooperatively with other players into a bit of a grid, trying to ensure that the cards are going in the right descending order. There's a bunch of variety of modules you can mix in to slightly mix up the experience, some rocks, some wreckage, different things you can throw in to make your life easier or harder. I think it's mostly harder, actually, but that's fine because the base game is pretty easy. You can win it 50% of the time when you first start, and that will only get higher as you go through the game more, as you play it more often. Tranquility is a really solid game, one that gives you a lot of things to think about as you work together to try to lay out the cards in the grid. Really relaxing, really delightful, not a ton of strategy, but it's rewarding, it's simple, it's engaging. Again, I understand why this one is ranked lower, but for me, it's a solid 8. Moving on the list, next up, we have Besieged. Besieged, from Cool Mini or not, possibly one of my least favorite games on this list, but on BoardGameGeek, it's ranked a 6.6. So, despite the fact that I have this as an 8, so a 1.4 gap there, big jump over there, moving to a 1.4 gap, a 6.6 on Besieged on BoardGameGeek is brutal. Now, I do understand part of the reason for that rating, again, and still I'm going to talk about it here. This is one of those times where I will say that people are wrong. Not that it should necessarily be an 8. That is a different story entirely, but the fact that it's a 6.6 is partially based and inspired by the fact that the rules are wrong. Or at least whether intended or written or mistakes, I don't know. But the rules that the designers put out for this game when you got it, they're wrong. Again, I don't know if they changed them after the fact or if they genuinely made mistakes, but I don't care. What I will say is if you follow the new rules, and if you're willing to house rule a bit, then Besieged is delightful. You see, Besieged in its basic pure state was brutally hard, impossible to win, like I remember I quote Sam Healey all the time when I talk about this game. Besieged is a game that Sam Healey, when he reviewed it, said, there's a good game in here somewhere, but it's not this. And that makes sense, because the rules are wrong, but there is a good game in here somewhere. Besieged, if you like any of these genres of game, if you like Massive Darkness, if you like Zombicide, if you like games where you roll dice, get powers and abilities, have amazing, beautiful miniatures, and take out the opponents as you work together to survive, Besieged is in that vein. It's a game that I keep looking at and wanting to get rid of, not because I don't like it, but because I have so many other games in this genre that I can't justify keeping Besieged. And yet I never get rid of Besieged because I like it so much. Despite all my issues with whatever it is or isn't, I still like Besieged too much to get rid of it, at least right now. One day it may leave, but that day is not yet today. This, to me, is so much fun as you work to defend. It's tower defense, basically. It's simulated tower defense. You have a central castle, you have various orc hordes, that's the one. You have various orc hordes moving towards the castle. You have to send your messenger out off to the distance in order to send for help and then return back as well, clearing the passage to them while people are attacking your castle and destroying the buildings in the zone. And the problem is your heroes have abilities. Your heroes can level up. Your heroes can start alternating between attacking the various invading hordes as well as taking time to get more weapons, get more spells, get more things, level up different options. You're trying to make sure that you can outpace the the increasing scale of the attack from the enemies, and you're doing so desperately trying to fight to survive the entire time. But along the way, you get more weapons, you get more powers and abilities, you get more things that are fun. So first of all, you have to be willing to look at the actual downloaded new rules, whatever it is, that give you a little bit more of blessings and stuff like that to start with, which actually gives you more of a chance to survive as opposed to the basic rules in which you'll die all the time. And then secondly, my own personal house rule is that we play with the decks of cards, the top card of each deck face up, so you can actually tactically plan around the things that are coming instead of just desperately saying, well, I could defeat this orc in front of the castle, or I can go to that building and hope I get something good. This way you know that when you go to the buildings you're getting something good. It is still hard, do not get me wrong, and there's plenty of ways to make the game very well balanced, but it's a lot more fun when you play it that way. Is it unfair that I'm comparing a house-ruled game with modifications to the rules from the designers and from myself to their rating? Yes, I am, but it's still, in my opinion, an underrated experience. Next up, we have City of Spies. City of Spies coming in at a 7.0 on Board Game Geek. This game is so ridiculously good. It's a 7.0 on Board Game Geek. It's a 4.5 or a 9 for me. That is a solid 2-point jump, okay? We've gone from all the small 1 and this 0.8s and the 1.4. We're up to a solid 2-point jump with City of Spies, Esoterial, Istoro? I don't know how to pronounce that. I've never known. I've always agreed with Tom Vassell, who said, and quoting Tom and Sam in this video, left and right, who cares? I've always agreed with Tom Vassell when he said the name of this game is ridiculous, it's stupid, it's silly. No one is inspired to play a game called The City of Spies, Esoterial, or Starro, I don't know. Either way, horrible name, but an amazing experience. This is a game where it has a degree of worker placement-ish, kind of. It's kind of worker placement. You're basically placing your spies into these various zones, trying to out-manipulate your opponent. You see, every single spy will have their abilities on them, but then these zones also have little abilities on them, so you're trying to combine the ability zone and the spy zones, and the placement of which zone resolves first, which one breaks ties effectively, and then trying to take into account the tactical navigation, because lots of things will happen as you reveal things. People will be shot as you reveal which spy is where. Other spies will be manipulated and turned to the other side, pushed and pulled to other zones. The rewards of the game will be manipulated and twisted. There's a lot of doublethink in this game, a lot of fun things going on. It is a beautiful, amazing experience, one that is tight, it is cutthroat, it is tense, and I don't understand how it's a 7.0 on Board Game Geek. Unless people are rating it before playing it based on the name alone, in which case I understand it totally, but ideally not a lot of people are doing that, so why is it 7.0? What am I missing? Clearly something, by the way. There is definitely something, because again, these are my opinions, not the general public's, but this game is amazing. If you like doublethink, if you like tactical maneuvering, if you like out-navigating your opponents, there's so much mess in a good way in this box. If you like games like Coop, if you like games like The Resistance, if you like games like Sheriff of Nottingham, if you like any of that mental mind game that goes into a game, and if you like worker placement and strategic tactical planning, and you like the combination of those all, City of Spies is an incredible experience. I need to review this on the channel. I keep talking about it here and there for the past 2 years. I've brought it up in the occasional video, but it's an incredible experience. I also have the 2491 Mothership, which is a newer version of the game. I've read the rules for that one, haven't actually played that one, I really need to, but City of Spies is an incredible game. It's an incredible game, one that you should be picking up if any of the things I said resonated with you at all. And next up, we have TAC. Now, TAC, by the way, for context, is the highest rated game on Board Game Geek that is on this list. It's a 7.6 on Board Game Geek. That's a decently rated game, but for me, it's a solid 10. It's a 5 out of 5. It's a 10 out of 10. TAC is one of the best games in my collection, which puts us at a 2.4 gap. That's what we're up to now. We're up to 2.4 on our gap scale. TAC is basically, it's abstract. That's what it is. It's an abstract game, but is arguably one of the best abstract games in my collection. It beats out Santorini. It is probably tied with Mythic Mischief, which isn't really available yet, so it's not really comparable. But even then, they're not really comparable games. But TAC is incredible. I can easily say it is my favorite abstract in my collection, because Mythic Mischief's half an abstract and half not. I don't know. We'll push that off to the side. TAC is my favorite abstract. TAC is a game that it's basically a grid. Okay, you can start off small. You can start off with a 3x3 grid. You can escalate to a 4x4, a 5x5, a 6x6, basically getting larger and larger as you master different things. And each time you level up from 3 to 4 to 5, you're going to add different aspects to the game. You start off with a basic game where the goal is to get your pieces to connect a direct line to the other side. A direct line does not mean a straight line. It just means a line to the other side. You're placing down pieces as you go. Great. Eventually, one player will get there. Then you move to the next level where you start introducing blockers. Blockers will get in the way of other players' pieces, and they're harder to put on top of because part of the game is moving pieces as well as placing pieces. But blockers won't help you connect. So it blocks your opponent, does not help you. Then we get to your capstone piece, which gets introduced by a 5x5 grid. Your capstone lets you stomp on other players' blockers, which really adds a whole degree of tension there, because suddenly even your blockers aren't safe. Now your blockers can actually be stomped on and turn into allies for yourself to help connect a direct line. Every single turn you either place pieces or you move a stack of pieces, and there's rules about the height of the stack and how you move things. But it is such a rich abstract, and it's based on the books from Patrick Rothfuss. They had this story of a game called Tak in there, and they made it into a real game, and mind-bogglingly enough, that real game is not only a good game, it is an absolutely great, amazing, phenomenal game. This is fine. It's a 7.6. I get it. It's a 5 out of 5. It's a 10 out of 10. It is an incredible experience. I love Tak. This is a game that I have gone on to like Etsy or whatever to try to see if I can find like a $400 deluxified over-the-top set. There's not a lot of games that I would do that for in my collection. Not a lot of games where I'm like, hey, I know this is perfectly fine as is, but how much prettier and nicer can I get? Sadly, the ones I have seen are not pretty enough, but it's one that I love this game so much. It is the kind of thing I want to have set up on a table, available. I mean, granted, I have kids, so it'd probably be lost. So I probably shouldn't get a $400 set. But one day my kids will be older, and then they'll have grandkids, so forget it. I'm never going to get a $400 set. But Tak is an incredible experience, even if we ignore for a second my plans for my kids and all of that. Which brings us to the next one on this list, which is Bruges. Bruges by Stefan Feld is a 7.4 on Board Game Geek, but again, it is a 5 out of 5 for me. These remaining games, from Tak onwards, are all 5 out of 5 for me, so the gap there is large. But a 7.4 to a 7.4 to a 5 out of 5 to a 10 out of 10 is a 2.6 point gap. Bruges is an incredible game. Now, I still like Castle of Burgundy better, and I feel like, why are you even talking about that? It's because Castle of Burgundy is Stefan Feld's, I think it's his highest rated game, and I understand that. I think it's a great game. But I think Bruges, for me, is my second favorite game from Stefan Feld. It is such a good experience. It's one that I played it way back in the day. My wife didn't like it, and this was back when I first discovered this when I was playing games almost exclusively with my wife. And she didn't like it, and so despite the fact that we generally kept Stefan Feld games, she was not into this one, so we got rid of it. Fine, no problem. Only played it once before moving on from it. But then over the course of COVID, when I was playing games online on yucata.de, I started playing Bruges a lot with my game group, and we loved this game. And so I got it back, because why in the world wouldn't I? Now, this is one that is part of the Stefan Feld City Collection from Queen Games. This is one that they've redone as, I believe, Hamburg. I think Hamburg is the one that they've redone as. They started off the first two as Bruges and Macau being reprinted as Hamburg and Amsterdam, I want to say. But Bruges, to me, first of all, the board looks nicer to me. The changes to the game, I'm all for. I'll try it out at some point, I assume. Maybe. I don't know. But this, though, this is such a good game. It's a game, it's typical Stefan Feld in the sense that you have some degree of bad things happening, you have these disasters you have to be mindful of, and then every single thing you do in the game will get you points. It's a question of how can you comprehensively work everything together in the way that gets you the most points in the best way possible. So it's classic point salad from Stefan Feld, but it's so rewarding, and to me the promise of Bruges is the potential, because every single game has so much ridiculous potential in the game. As you try to gather these cards will all work together in different ways, and so you can build up these combos that are ridiculously over the top and amazingly well done. This game, by the way, for context, is out of print. This thing will run you $100 easily for the out of print version of the game because it's still sought after. Despite being a 7.4, people are paying $100 plus to get their hands on this game, and I will not let this thing go over my dead body, along with the tax that I'm never getting. But whatever it is, Bruges is so ridiculously good. It is like a marginal point below Castle of Burgundy for me. If Castle of Burgundy is a 5, this is a 4.9, but I don't do 4.9, so it's a 5 for me. But either way, solid game. I highly recommend Bruges if you like Stefan Feld in general, maybe that kind of thing. I mean, still, 7.4 is not a bad game, and even then, it's a question of how highly you rank this one. Next up, we have Aquatica. Aquatica coming in at a 7.4 on Board Game Geek again, and if you've heard me talk over the past year, you know that for me this is a 5 out of 5 as well. You see, Aquatica from Arcane Wonders, from the Dice Tower Essentials, is such a beautiful experience to me. It is one of my favorite discoveries from 2021. I think it's a 2020 game, but I only played it in 2021. It's one of my favorite discoveries in 2021. I'm happy I discovered it in 2021 because I discovered it along with the Deep Waters expansion, which might be the reason for the rating difference, by the way. You see, I think Aquatica to begin with is a good game, but I think the Deep Waters expansion easily takes it to the next level, which probably makes this a unfair comparison now that I'm thinking about it. But I guess it's still a fair comparison, because if you looked at Aquatica and thought 7.4, I'll get to that next year, we'll understand that the Deep Waters expansion will bring it higher, at least for me. Without the Deep Waters expansion, I think it would probably be a 4 or 4.5, as opposed to the 5 out of 5 it is now. Again, 7.4 to a 10, Aquatica is such a good experience. It's the classic hand of cards you're going to see in Concordia. You're going to see it in the Century series of games. where you have a hand of cards, you play a card, and eventually when you run out of cards, you pull your cards back. You could pull your cards back early, but if you do so, you're kind of risking giving up turns of inefficiency. So you want to be as efficient as possible, while also not dragging out too many slightly inefficient turns to save yourself one large inefficient turn. It's a balance. But along with that balance, you're trying to gather these sea kingdoms, and you're slotting these sea kingdoms into your board, and then you're kind of cashing them up along with your manta rays that you're going to be earning, or using this combination of resources to get what you need, to conquer kingdoms, to gather new characters, to put your bonuses, your manta rays on these bonuses that will give you scoring opportunities in the game. It is such a good game. Plays ridiculously well at 2 and 3 players, slows down a little bit at 4, but I'll still happily play it at 4, because even at 4 players, you can get a solid game of this done in an hour, 15 hour, 20 minutes. It is so rewarding for the amount of punchiness it gives. If you like Euros, if you like innovative games that do things differently, Aquatica absolutely does things differently. Which brings us to number 9 on this list, which is Wild Assent. Oh my gosh, this is a big box. Wild Assent, a 7.3 on Board Game Geek, a 5 out of 5 for me. That is a 2.7 point gap. 2.7 points. And I kind of get this one in some way, shape, or form. Some things I get, some things I just disagree with. So let's cover what Wild Assent is and then cover some of the differences in points. Wild Assent is a skirmish game. It is both a cooperative and a competitive skirmish game. As you go into the wilds, you go through a campaign of hunting different creatures, of trying to have your seekers survive in the jungle, leveling up slowly, getting more and more powerful, taking out the baddies, all of that stuff. Ridiculously fun, ridiculously rewarding. This is the original Kickstarter version, not the new one that was on GameFound, Levon Rising, and all of that. There's even more narrative, more things. I'm still just talking about the original base game here. The original base game is a 5 out of 5 for me. I really, really appreciated the leveling up of your characters as you wandered around and try to figure out the puzzle of taking down the baddies while trying to not die as much as possible. Not dying in many games is a good thing. Now, there's a competitive mode. I still, to this day, have not played it. I haven't felt the need to. I probably should at some point, but the cooperative mode gives you so much stuff to do. It gives you gear and hunters and workers and different things that you have. There's so many different ways to level up and augment. It's basically Kingdom Death Monster Light. I haven't played Kingdom Death Monster. I'm quoting Jeremy Howard, who has played both, and he coined that term, so blame him, but it feels, from what I do know at Kingdom Death Monster, it feels like KDM Light. You can play it across 10 missions. That's a manageable 10 to 15, maybe 20-hour journey as you go through things, as you level up, as you figure out the mastery of your characters. And then when you're bored and when you're done, you can start again with entirely new seekers, so you'll have an entirely new puzzle, an entirely new experience, along with the fact that you're likely going to fight against different monsters, especially if you have the expansion, if you have the something of the Silverstone, whatever it is. But there's so much going on in this game, a ton of variability, and a glorious puzzle. Now, some of the ratings differences are for the fact that the rulebook is horrible. True, I agree with you 100%. The rulebook was not great. It has to be struggled through. The information is 97% there, but 3% is not there, and the other 15% is a little harder to find. So, rulebook's not great, I'll give you that. Anyone who's rating it based on the competitive mode, I wouldn't know. I haven't even played the competitive mode. And then people who are rating it based on the enemy AI not being advanced enough, I agree with you. Now, I don't mind that because I wanted KDM Light, but if you wanted deeper, more nuanced monsters, then understand that yes, the monster AI is on the light side, especially compared to a deeper, more advanced boss monster experience. But Wild Assent is, if you were skipping on this game, if you were not paying attention, there are people who don't love this game. I believe One Stop Co-op Shop didn't love it, King of Average didn't love it, you can check that out. But then myself, Game Brigade, Legion of Games, Jeremy Howard, there are a lot of people who did love this game. So I'm definitely not alone, but I'm also, not the only opinion either. All those things are true, which brings us to the last game on this list. A game rated 7.2 on Board Game Geek, a game rated a 5 out of 5, a 10 out of 10 for myself. That is a 2.8 gap, and the largest gap from all the games, both the ones I physically own and the ones that I no longer currently have, but we'll get back. We have Carson City. Carson City, and I have the big boxes by Xavier Georges, I don't know entirely, but this is such a good game. This Carson City is a worker placement game with a Western theme. Carson City, let me try to stack this somewhere where it won't destroy all my boxes with the sheer weight and heft of all the glorious goodness in this box. I have deluxe fight, everything for this game. Carson City is worker placement, but it's brutal in-your-face worker placement. You see, you have your cowboys, your workers. You're going to be placing them on different zones of the board because you have this grid, this town, this Carson City that you're colonizing, and you're going to be fighting over the land. You want to claim the land, but then if another player puts their worker there, eventually the two of you will duel, and one of you will get your worker back for next turn, so you don't fully lose the action, and the other player will win. So the threat of combat is always pivotal here because nobody wants to give up their turn. Nobody wants to lose what they're trying to seek. So you're playing this constant tense battle of placing down your different workers, trying to stay out of each other's way as much as possible, but eventually someone will go somewhere that is pivotal to your strategy. Whether it's on the board, whether it's one of the action spaces, whether it's one of the buildings, there's always going to eventually be somewhere where someone's like, I know I don't want to fight, I know I don't want to lose my action, but something's got to happen, and I got to sit down and lay down the law and show you who's boss because I need that building for my strategy. And then battle breaks out. Because then the next player goes to someone to get extra guns or something. Someone else will take the sheriff because now the game's starting to heat up and you can use those extra guns. Somebody else grabs the bandit. There's a ton of different tense developments that will happen as you play this game. You start the game every round by picking a character. A character will give you different starting bonuses in the game. Then you start placing out your cowboys, your workers, to both the land, to well-developed land, to buildings where you can start gathering buildings and putting them on those land spots, to a variety of action spaces on the board that will let you do anything else. You can start wandering. Once people have buildings that are earning money, you can start trying to simply rob them, simply speaking, just rob them. You'll go ahead and start putting your people, your cowboys on the buildings to rob them. Granted, they can go ahead and return and put their own cowboy down to defend. It ends up being a delicious worker placement game that I love this game, and there's so much modularity to it. There's tons of characters, tons of little extra things. I haven't played with half of it, which is typical for me in expansions. I only add expansion stuff when I feel I'm getting a little bit bored of the base experience and I'm nowhere near close to bored. The amount of characters they have, the amount of content they have, the amount of variability the game brings in every single time you play it with the players at the table, the way that meta develops as you try to go through balancing the characters you need, the buildings you want, the board state you're trying to go for. The board will also be a little variable every single game as you have different starting points of mountains on the board and things like that. It is a delightful experience. It is a meaty game. If you like Euros, if you like if you like worker placement, if you like Euros, if you don't mind a little bit of conflict, it's a great experience. Who it's not for? Well, if you don't like the idea of having your workers fought over and potentially losing your turn, you'll get it back next turn. You don't lose your worker. Next turn, you'll have an extra worker, and they won't. So you get it back. And in fact, every worker that retreats goes back to your supply, making subsequent fights better. So as you lose, it is more likely that you will gain in the next fight that happens that round. So there's definitely balance around it, but I can understand why it wouldn't necessarily be for you. But it's such a good game. So ridiculously good. This, for context, by the way, was the inspiration for me putting together this list in the first place. I know I said the patrons voted on it because I threw together a few games. Over time, I keep these lists, and I put down Carson City in a list called Top 10 Underrated Games. And then I added 2 other lists, and I only fully fleshed this out once the Patreon community voted on this, at which point I tried to go through the rest of my collection to find the other games I needed. And that's it. These are the top 10, 12 if you count me cheating as usual, 12 games that I consider to be underrated experiences. There were a good 6 or 7 more that I wanted to add, but eventually I just sorted them by the biggest gaps, and I chose the ones that had the biggest gap in score from the Board Game Geek rating to the way I rate it. These are fantastic games, all with different reasons I'd recommend them to one person or another, but all games that I can easily recommend. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, have a good one.